The story begins on a late afternoon, with the sun dipping low behind the distant hills, casting long, quivering shadows across the sprawling plantation. A thick mist begins to creep along the edges of the fields, weaving between the rows of aged oaks and draping the landscape in a ghostly pallor. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and magnolia blossoms, and there is a quiet almost unnatural in its stillness, as though the land itself is holding its breath. In this setting, a solitary figure moves with deliberate grace along the wide, gravel-lined avenues that lead to the manor. Every footfall echoes softly against the silent walls, carrying with it a sense of purpose and calculation. The woman at the center of the story is introduced not through words, but through observation, the tilt of her head as she surveys the estate, the careful measurement in her eyes of every person who passes, and the subtle, almost imperceptible gestures that signal both command and attentiveness. Even in these early moments, it is clear that she is unlike anyone else on the plantation. Her presence is both magnetic and unsettling. She radiates charm while cloaking a mind of extraordinary acuity. Servants and overseers alike notice her arrival, some with curiosity, others with a quiet wariness, though none can articulate why their unease feels so persistent. The narrative focuses on these small, telling interactions, the way a glance from her causes hesitation, how a casual remark seems to ripple through the ranks of workers, or the faint tightening of a mouth when she passes by. Each moment is laden with subtext, hinting at a growing, invisible web of influence being spun around her. The camera, or the narrative perspective, shifts to her private quarters, revealing early glimpses of her life before this calculated ascent. Childhood memories flicker into view, a young girl observing the subtle hierarchies among her family, noting who held power and who merely performed it, learning that obedience could be weaponized, and that charm could be a shield. These early impressions are contrasted with the rigid social structure of the plantation, highlighting the delicate balance of dominance and subservience that governs every interaction. She internalizes these lessons, understanding that survival, and eventual triumph, will require a precise blend of patience, observation, and psychological insight. Outside, the plantation itself seems alive, almost complicit in the unfolding story. The whispering wind through the oaks carries echoes of past lives, hinting at long-buried secrets that have shaped the land as much as the families who inhabit it. Small, enigmatic incidents punctuate the narrative, a door that creaks open with no apparent cause, a sudden chill in the air, the rustle of silk or the faint clatter of a dropped key in a distant corridor. These details are subtle but deliberate, evoking a sense that the plantation is a character in its own right, bearing silent witness to the woman's rising presence and the strategies she is beginning to weave. The narrative then delves into her first careful observations of the people she will encounter daily, the staff, overseers, and members of the family. Every gesture, every whispered conversation, every hesitation is noted, catalogued, and assessed. Through these meticulous studies, she begins to anticipate reactions, manipulate perceptions, and sow seeds of influence, often without anyone realizing that they are being observed at all. The tension is heightened as the audience senses that beneath the surface charm and polite engagement lies an intellect capable of subtle but profound manipulation. Her ambition is framed as quiet but inexorable, a slow-burning fire that illuminates her every interaction with strategic purpose. Early hints of her ruthlessness emerge not through violence, but through precision and patience. She notices rivalries, grievances, and insecurities, storing them carefully, understanding that the smallest piece of knowledge can become a decisive advantage later. The narrative emphasizes the duality of her presence, outwardly graceful and composed, inwardly calculating, always plotting the next move in a complex, unseen game of power. As the sun dips further and shadows lengthen, the scene expands to include the greater landscape of the plantation. Rows of crops stretch into the distance, workers move in silent coordination, and the river glimmers faintly under the twilight sky. The visual and narrative elements work in tandem to create a sense of foreboding. This is not simply a home, nor merely a place of work, it is a theater of power, intrigue, and unseen conflict. Within this theater, the woman is poised to rise, and the first whispers of her ambitions begin to stir among the oaks, signaling the start of a story where influence will be won through intellect, observation, and an unyielding drive that refuses to be ignored. By the end of this opening section, the audience is drawn deeply into the atmospheric tension of the plantation, understanding both the stakes and the psychological landscape that will shape the unfolding narrative. The sense of unease lingers, leaving viewers aware that every glance, every gesture, and every decision on this estate carries consequences far beyond what is immediately visible, and that the story of this woman's ascent has only just begun. The plantation stretches endlessly beneath the weight of history, its sprawling fields dotted with gnarled oaks draped in Spanish moss that sways gently in the warm southern breeze. Every branch seems to hang heavy with unspoken memories, as though the very landscape remembers the lives that have passed through it, the laughter of children, the murmurs of forbidden conversations, the subtle exchanges of power that have long shaped the estate's destiny. The manor itself rises proudly at the center, its white columns gleaming in the dappled sunlight, yet the grandeur is tempered by the shadows that cling to its corners, hidden alcoves, darkened hallways, and rooms where secrets accumulate like dust. It is in this environment that the woman's ambitions begin to take shape, her mind attuned to both the physical and social architecture that will define her path. The narrative examines the rigid hierarchies that govern every aspect of life on the plantation. The family at its head commands unquestioned respect and authority, yet beneath the surface, alliances shift like the wind, loyalties are transactional, and subtle manipulations determine one's position. Servants navigate a delicate balance between obedience and survival, their movements and choices closely watched by those who wield power. Against this backdrop, the woman's upbringing and early experiences come into focus. She is shown absorbing the rhythms of the estate, learning which rules are absolute, which are performative, and which can be bent to one's advantage. Her intelligence is not brute or overt, it is careful, measured, and profoundly aware of human weakness. Childhood memories interlace with vivid observations of the estate's operations. The narrative highlights moments in which she notices patterns of influence, the ways in which small gestures, a choice of words, or a particular timing can shift perception and loyalty. She watches her family, the elder women who manage the household, the men who oversee the fields, and the servants who carry both the weight of labor and the secrets of the estate. Every interaction becomes a lesson in strategy, every smile a potential tool, every glance a data point. Even as a young girl, she begins to map the invisible lines of authority and control, recognizing that power is rarely explicit, it is earned through perception, manipulation, and the careful orchestration of circumstance. The plantation's social ecosystem is described in cinematic detail. Field hands toil under the sun, their movements precise, rhythmic, and silent in the heat of labor, while overseers patrol the grounds, enforcing both discipline and hierarchy. Within the manor, a different kind of labor unfolds, the coordination of meals, the management of social gatherings, the subtle negotiation of influence over allies and rivals alike. The woman begins to understand that true power lies not in physical force, but in the ability to navigate these parallel systems, the visible and invisible mechanisms that govern every interaction. Her observations extend beyond the plantation walls, as she notes the town's social hierarchy, local politics, and the influence of religion, realizing that her ambitions must encompass more than the estate if they are to reach their ultimate height. Historical context is woven seamlessly into the narrative, offering glimpses of the broader social and economic structures of the South. The plantation is not merely a home, it is a microcosm of the society that sustains it, reliant on the labor of enslaved people, the traditions of established families, and the fragile facades of civility that mask brutality and inequality. The narrative does not dwell on moral judgment but instead emphasizes the psychological and strategic environment that shapes every decision. In this world, appearances are paramount, and the ability to maintain composure while influencing outcomes is a mark of mastery. The woman's emerging skills are framed against this backdrop, illustrating how early exposure to such systems honed her intellect and ambition. A series of early episodes underscores her acumen. Observing minor conflicts among servants, she anticipates the outcomes, subtly guiding behavior to align with her interests. She notices the unspoken tension between family members, identifying rivalries and leveraging small acts to shift loyalties. Social gatherings become laboratories for experimentation. She notes who is deferential, who is brash, who reacts to praise or insult, and who can be swayed through subtle pressure. Each interaction adds to her growing understanding of human psychology, demonstrating her capacity to translate observation into influence. The narrative emphasizes that these are not random acts, they are deliberate steps in a long-term strategy that requires patience, precision, and unerring attention to detail. The sensory environment reinforces the psychological tension. The smell of wet earth after rain, the rustle of leaves, the distant sound of water lapping against the riverbank, all combine to create an atmosphere in which the viewer or reader can sense the quiet undercurrent of ambition. Even the physical layout of the estate, the positioning of buildings, the flow of corridors, the line of sight across the fields, plays into her strategic awareness. She learns to move through space in ways that maximize observation and control, turning the estate itself into an instrument of influence. Shadows become allies, corridors become stages, and even the simple act of entering a room carries calculated meaning. By the end of this section, the narrative has firmly established both the richness of the historical setting and the psychological framework within which the woman operates. The plantation is no longer merely a backdrop, it is a living, breathing entity, responding to the machinations of those who inhabit it. The audience understands the intricate social structures, the high stakes of reputation and perception, and the extraordinary acuity required to navigate such a world. The stage is set for her first moves in the complex games of influence that will define her life, and the sense of anticipation is palpable, as if every shadow and whisper on the estate is already part of her design. The woman's initial maneuvers in the intricate web of plantation power begin subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet with a precision that hints at the intelligence and ruthlessness lurking beneath her composed exterior. She moves through the manor and grounds with the careful observation of a strategist, noting patterns, alliances, and weaknesses among both family and staff. Each interaction is a small calculation, a test of loyalty, a probe for hidden motives. Conversations are never casual, a misplaced word or a fleeting glance becomes an opportunity to gather insight. Her early actions are deliberate experiments in influence, designed to reveal character traits and create leverage that may later prove decisive. The narrative portrays her not as overtly manipulative at first, but as someone whose quiet attentiveness masks a mind capable of orchestrating complex social maneuvers. Her first engagements with rival factions are marked by subtlety. A dismissed complaint here, a small favor granted there, a carefully timed compliment or observation, all serve as gentle nudges that shift perception and alliances. The audience witnesses her slowly consolidating knowledge, cataloging every reaction, every hesitation, every flicker of discomfort or approval. The psychological tension builds as viewers realize that beneath her calm demeanor lies a relentless calculation. She is mapping the emotional and political terrain of the plantation in preparation for larger maneuvers. There is no rush, the pace of her ascent is measured, and patience is her tool as much as wit. Small, seemingly insignificant events become instruments of influence. A servant misplaces a letter, an overseer shows impatience, a family member inadvertently reveals a fear or desire, all of these are noted and internalized. She begins to connect patterns, identifying who is reliable, who is susceptible to persuasion, and who is a potential threat. The narrative emphasizes her keen understanding of human psychology. She knows that influence often resides not in overt control but in anticipation, in the subtle shaping of behavior and perception. Her early moves are less about domination and more about planting seeds that will grow into leverage over time. The social rituals of the plantation become her laboratory. Family dinners, small gatherings, and casual strolls through the fields are all occasions for careful observation and strategic engagement. She notes which voices carry weight, which smiles conceal tension, which gestures betray anxiety. Even minor acts, a touch on the shoulder, a shared joke, a strategically delivered compliment, become tools for building rapport, testing loyalty, or quietly undermining opposition. The narrative portrays these interactions with cinematic precision, highlighting the way ordinary events are transformed into arenas for psychological gamesmanship. As the woman navigates these early maneuvers, the audience is shown her duality, outwardly charming, dutiful, and approachable, yet inwardly calculating, patient, and unyielding. This contrast heightens the tension, emphasizing the stakes of her rise. Those around her may see only a competent and graceful young woman, but the narrative gradually reveals the subtle mechanisms of her growing influence. Rivalries that seemed innocuous take on a sharper edge, minor disputes acquire strategic significance, and even casual observations become part of a larger map of power. The section delves into a series of incidents that illustrate the growing reach of her influence. A minor dispute between two servants is resolved in a manner that quietly elevates her status in their eyes. A slight disagreement between family members is mediated with a combination of tact and subtle manipulation, creating gratitude and loyalty. Through these actions, she begins to establish herself as someone capable of navigating conflicts and shaping outcomes without overt force, demonstrating the quiet mastery of social engineering that will define her ascent. Folklore and local superstitions begin to intertwine with her actions, adding an almost mythic quality to her maneuvers. Rumors circulate that she has uncanny foresight, that her presence shifts the dynamics of any room she enters. The narrative uses these perceptions to heighten suspense, illustrating how reputation and perception are as powerful as any concrete action in consolidating influence. The audience senses that her abilities are more than skill, they are an almost preternatural understanding of human behavior, which allows her to anticipate, manipulate, and dominate social dynamics with subtlety and precision. Her first true tests come when others begin to resist or challenge her influence. Rivalries intensify as those who recognize her growing power attempt to undermine or expose her. The narrative depicts clandestine conversations, subtle undermining, and the psychological pressure of navigating these threats. Yet, even in these moments, her responses are calculated and measured. She does not confront openly, she observes, adapts, and strikes only where necessary, turning opposition into opportunity. The tension escalates as the audience witnesses both the elegance and ruthlessness of her strategic mind. By the end of this section, it is clear that she is no ordinary figure within the plantation's hierarchy. Her early moves have set the stage for broader influence, her actions leaving invisible marks on both social and psychological structures. The audience sees the meticulous nature of her approach, the patient weaving of alliances, the quiet but undeniable accumulation of power. Shadows, whispers, and subtle exchanges become instruments in her growing repertoire, and the plantation itself seems to respond to her presence. The narrative closes this chapter with the sense that the first pieces of her intricate game are now in motion, the full consequences of her ambition yet to be revealed but already shaping the lives and fates of those around her. As the woman's influence grows, whispers begin to circulate across the plantation, threading their way through corridors, quarters, and fields like a slow-moving current. Small anomalies, seemingly coincidental events, start to draw attention, misplaced letters, fleeting glances exchanged between staff, objects subtly moved or altered. The narrative emphasizes that these incidents are never overtly threatening but are imbued with a sense of quiet disquiet. Those who witness them feel a subtle unease, a premonition that something beneath the surface is shifting, though they cannot articulate what it is. Every whispered observation becomes a testament to her rising strategic prowess, as she manipulates perception without ever being overtly seen as manipulative. The plantation itself seems to respond to these changes. The ancient oaks sway differently in the wind, shadows stretch longer across the manicured lawns, and corridors that once felt open and welcoming now carry an undercurrent of tension. The narrative highlights how physical space, rooms, hallways, and hidden corners, intersects with psychological space, turning the estate into a theater for subtle power plays. Even the servants' quarters, usually a place of privacy and camaraderie, become arenas where loyalty and fear quietly shift, as her influence begins to extend into every facet of daily life. The narrative creates a palpable sense that the land itself bears witness to these unseen manipulations. Rumors circulate with increasing frequency, their sources difficult to trace. A passing comment about a missing item, an overheard conversation about a quiet intervention in a dispute, or a subtle alteration of schedules, all these tiny acts begin to feed a growing narrative among those who inhabit the estate. The woman's ability to remain above suspicion while orchestrating these events elevates her mystique. She is seen smiling, attentive, and graceful, yet behind that facade, every move is deliberate. The audience senses a duality. The public perception of innocence contrasts sharply with the reality of her careful orchestration of events, reinforcing the tension between appearance and truth. The narrative introduces minor conflicts among the staff and family members, all subtly influenced by her maneuvers. A servant's confidence is quietly undermined, leading them to seek her guidance. A family member's objection is skillfully reframed, making them appear petty or misguided in the eyes of others. Through these interventions, she is gradually reshaping relationships, testing the limits of loyalty, and establishing channels of influence that are invisible yet potent. Each act is precise, never excessive, demonstrating an extraordinary understanding of social dynamics and the psychology of power. Her enigma deepens as she begins to exploit the unseen fears and ambitions of those around her. The narrative explores her acute perception of human desires, who seeks recognition, who craves approval, who fears exposure. Every interaction is a puzzle she pieces together, each subtle gesture or carefully chosen word nudging individuals toward outcomes that serve her objectives. The tension escalates as those under her influence begin to sense an unseen hand shaping events. They may attribute her insights to intuition, coincidence, or even supernatural foresight, but the audience understands the calculated precision underlying her actions. Folklore and superstition begin to mingle with reality. Servants speak in hushed tones about her uncanny awareness, neighbors murmur about her seemingly prescient insights, and subtle accidents or coincidences are increasingly linked to her presence. The narrative uses these perceptions to heighten the atmosphere, illustrating how fear and reverence can amplify influence. Her growing aura of mystery acts as both shield and weapon. She is respected, even feared, and no one can directly challenge her without risking exposure or embarrassment. The section delves into episodes that reveal the psychological impact of her maneuvers. Individuals who once acted independently begin to second-guess themselves, adjusting behavior unconsciously to align with her perceived expectations. Rivalries that seemed purely personal now become tools in her strategic network. Every social encounter carries weight, and every choice of words or gesture is scrutinized by those hoping to anticipate her next move. The narrative emphasizes how influence, once invisible, becomes internalized by others, shaping decisions and allegiances without direct confrontation. In addition to social manipulation, she begins to observe subtle shifts in the estate's operational dynamics. Workers' efficiency, family interactions, and even daily routines reflect the quiet pressure of her presence. The narrative portrays her as a master of psychological subtlety, capable of adjusting circumstances, creating expectations, and guiding behavior while remaining outwardly benign. This capacity for invisible orchestration elevates her from a figure of charm and intelligence to one of strategic authority, where control is exercised not through command but through perception and influence. By the end of this section, it becomes evident that the woman's quiet consolidation of power is both relentless and methodical. The plantation, the social fabric, and the psychological landscape of those within it are all being reshaped, often without conscious recognition. Shadows and whispers are not mere atmosphere, they are instruments of her subtle dominion. The audience is left with a growing sense of tension, a recognition that her network of influence is both expansive and invisible, and that the plantation itself has become a stage for a complex, unseen game. Every whisper, every shadow, and every small anomaly signals the calculated unfolding of her ambition, setting the stage for deeper conflict and the inevitable escalation of her power. As whispers and subtle anomalies begin to weave their way through the plantation, the broader social and familial structures respond with denial and suppression. Elders of the family, influential overseers, and even neighboring landowners refuse to acknowledge the growing shift in power, attributing rumors to idle gossip, youthful imagination, or moral failings. Religious justifications are frequently invoked, invoking the sanctity of order, divine providence, or the natural hierarchy of society. This collective denial creates an atmosphere in which her rising influence goes largely unchecked, giving her the perfect cover to continue her subtle consolidation of control. The narrative portrays this interplay between outward denial and inward awareness as a psychological battlefield, where appearances are defended more fiercely than truth. The woman learns to use this denial as a tool. By presenting herself as polite, dutiful, and morally upright, she reinforces the perception that any notion of her manipulation is preposterous. Her actions are framed in ways that appear benign, charitable, or practical, allowing her to operate within the bounds of societal expectation while quietly bending them to her advantage. Small favors, measured gestures, and calculated kindnesses become instruments for earning trust, loyalty, and influence. The audience sees the meticulous care with which she balances public perception against private strategy, each move crafted to maintain her untouchable image. Conflicts and rivalries that might have exposed her are deftly neutralized. When a family member questions her motives or a servant expresses suspicion, she responds with grace and plausible explanations, deflecting attention and disarming skepticism. This creates a dual reality. Outwardly, she is the model of respectability. Inwardly, she wields an increasing degree of control. The narrative emphasizes the tension between perception and reality, showing how denial, both by others and by themselves, becomes a powerful enabler of her rise. Every doubter is subtly neutralized, often without recognizing they have been influenced, and every ally grows more dependent on her guidance. The plantation's social and operational structures further shield her actions. Meetings, chores, and communal gatherings are carefully observed and manipulated to reinforce her authority indirectly. A decision framed as collective input may, in fact, have been orchestrated to produce a predetermined outcome. A minor oversight in the scheduling of labor or the handling of resources can be leveraged to display competence and leadership. These small acts accumulate, gradually shifting the balance of power without provoking overt confrontation. The narrative emphasizes her skill at exploiting systemic blind spots, turning routine operations into subtle exercises in influence. Psychological tension increases as the narrative explores the inner lives of those around her. Servants begin to feel a quiet unease, sensing that their choices are being subtly guided, yet unable to identify the source. Family members, despite social conditioning and experience, start to question their perceptions, often justifying discrepancies through rationalization or denial. This internal conflict heightens suspense, as the audience understands the depth of her manipulative reach while the characters remain partially unaware of its extent. Her genius lies in the invisibility of her maneuvers. Their effects are felt but rarely traced back to her directly. Local superstitions and rumors amplify the aura of her control. Whispers that she possesses insight beyond her years, that she seems to anticipate events before they occur, and that even the smallest disturbances align with her will spread quietly through the community. These beliefs, though unverified, act as additional layers of protection, ensuring that challenges to her authority are met with hesitation or fear. The narrative uses these subtle touches to heighten suspense, showing how perception, reputation, and belief operate alongside strategy in consolidating power. The section examines specific incidents where denial and suppression intersect with her strategies. A minor theft within the manor is quietly resolved in her favor, leaving the responsible party confused and grateful. A family disagreement is mediated in a way that appears impartial, yet outcomes subtly favor her allies. Even moments of potential exposure are skillfully navigated, leaving her unscathed while others unwittingly reinforce her position. These vignettes illustrate her ability to operate within the social rules of the plantation while bending them to her advantage, each move reinforcing her growing dominance. By the close of this section, the narrative has firmly established the psychological and social framework that allows her to rise almost unnoticed. Denial by others, reliance on appearances, and the subtle manipulation of perception create a fertile ground for her continued ascent. The plantation, the family, and the staff all become instruments of her influence, not through coercion or force, but through the careful orchestration of perception and the exploitation of human tendencies toward denial, rationalization, and obedience. The audience is left with a heightened sense of tension and anticipation, aware that her power is consolidating quietly but inexorably, and that the next stage of her ascent will bring her influence into sharper, more decisive focus. By now, the woman's presence extends far beyond the walls of the manor, infiltrating the rhythms of the plantation and the surrounding community. Social gatherings, once casual affairs, become stages upon which she performs subtle acts of influence. She hosts dinners, arranges meetings, and orchestrates events where every detail, seat placement, timing of remarks, the exchange of glances, is deliberately designed to observe, test, and guide those in attendance. These occasions serve not only to strengthen her public image but to gather intelligence on allegiances, weaknesses, and desires. The narrative emphasizes her ability to turn ordinary interactions into strategic opportunities, showcasing a mind attuned to the nuances of human behavior. Her skill in reading people becomes increasingly apparent. She observes mannerisms, tone, and body language with a precision that borders on intuitive genius. A servant's fleeting hesitation, a family member's subtle frown, or a guest's nervous laugh, all are catalogued and interpreted. She begins to anticipate reactions, crafting her responses to elicit desired outcomes. The audience is made aware of her duality, outwardly warm, charming, and approachable, yet inwardly calculating, always analyzing, always planning. These social experiments are conducted seamlessly, leaving those around her oblivious to the deliberate manipulations that shape their perceptions and decisions. The narrative details specific episodes that illustrate the breadth and depth of her influence. A casual conversation about labor assignments becomes a subtle exercise in alliance building, as she nudges key figures into positions that will later support her authority. A disagreement between family members is carefully mediated to favor outcomes aligned with her long-term strategy, demonstrating her ability to balance diplomacy with subtle dominance. Even minor gestures, a well-timed compliment, a small favor, a sympathetic ear, are deployed with precision, gradually weaving a web of trust, dependence, and subtle indebtedness. Through these acts, she consolidates power without confrontation, relying instead on the quiet, invisible mechanisms of influence. The woman's manipulation extends to perception itself. She carefully curates how she is seen by others, cultivating an image of grace, virtue, and capability that masks the calculated strategies beneath. This duality amplifies her authority. People trust her because she appears trustworthy, respect her because she appears fair, and admire her because she embodies the ideals valued by the community. Meanwhile, she quietly orchestrates outcomes to reinforce her position, leaving no trace of overt coercion. The narrative emphasizes the psychological tension inherent in this dynamic, illustrating how appearances can be weaponized as effectively as force or intimidation. Her growing reputation intersects with local superstitions and whispers, enhancing her aura of influence. Stories circulate that she seems to anticipate events, that her presence changes the dynamics of any room, and that misfortunes often align with her objectives, whether intentionally or by coincidence. These tales, though unverifiable, amplify the psychological effect of her presence, ensuring that challenges to her authority are met with hesitation or fear. The narrative uses these layers of perception to heighten suspense, showing how influence operates not only through action but through the beliefs and expectations of others. Challenges arise, and the woman demonstrates her skill in neutralizing potential threats. When rivals attempt to undermine her, she employs a combination of observation, subtle intervention, and social maneuvering. Missteps by those who seek to oppose her are quietly turned to her advantage, reinforcing her control. The narrative portrays these moments with cinematic tension. Each confrontation is a delicate balance of psychology and strategy, where one wrong move could expose her ambitions, yet every action is calculated to protect her position while subtly disarming opposition. Beyond individual interactions, she begins to shape broader social dynamics. Patterns of loyalty, influence, and communication are gradually altered by her interventions, often without conscious recognition by those affected. Workers, family members, and neighbors adjust behavior in response to her presence, internalizing expectations she subtly sets. The plantation becomes a theater of influence, with her as the unseen director, guiding outcomes while maintaining an outward appearance of benign leadership. The audience witnesses her mastery of human behavior, understanding that true power often resides not in force but in the invisible architecture of perception, expectation, and subtle control. Her ambition now stretches into multiple domains: social, operational, and psychological. She is simultaneously observer, mediator, strategist, and manipulator, a constant presence whose influence permeates every interaction. The narrative emphasizes the meticulous care with which she balances these roles, maintaining an image of civility and grace while advancing her control. Tension rises as the audience anticipates how far she will go, aware that her growing network of influence positions her to reshape not just the plantation but the social and political environment around it. By the end of this section, it is clear that the woman has moved beyond initial manipulations and minor advantages. She has become a force within the plantation and community, her influence both pervasive and largely invisible. Every gesture, every interaction, every carefully curated perception contributes to a growing network of control that others scarcely perceive. The stage is now set for direct challenges, rivalries, and the inevitable psychological and social consequences of her ascent. The audience is left with an acute sense of suspense and anticipation, aware that her mastery of influence has reached a level where even the smallest misstep by others can be subtly exploited to further her objectives. Karina's rise into the inner workings of Briarwall Plantation continues, but now with a heightened sense of strategy and patience. She gains access to more intimate family matters, the ledgers, and confidential correspondences that reveal the true depth of the estate's financial and social vulnerabilities. She observes the matriarch's careful control over the household and realizes that influence is not only about public gestures but also about controlling perception behind closed doors. Karina begins to subtly redirect conversations, planting suggestions that appear to originate from others but serve her long-term vision. She studies the fears and desires of each household member, noting which alliances are fragile, which loyalties can be bought, and which rivalries are most exploitable. Her interactions with the staff grow increasingly calculated. She listens carefully to their grievances and uses this information to predict reactions and manipulate outcomes. A servant's casual complaint about an overseer might later be used to discredit that overseer when the time is right. At the same time, she cultivates a reputation for empathy and discretion, making people confide in her without realizing they are feeding her power. Karina also observes the heir's increasingly erratic behavior and begins laying the groundwork to isolate him psychologically, subtly encouraging doubt and insecurity while presenting herself as the only reliable presence in the house. In this section, the plantation itself becomes almost a character: the long hallways, the flickering candlelight, the musty smell of papers and wood, the creak of floorboards beneath quiet footsteps, all of it mirrors Karina's quiet, deliberate movements through the estate's hierarchy. Every decision, no matter how small, is part of a larger design to consolidate influence. The tension builds as she maneuvers around the matriarch's awareness, ensuring that her advice is credited to others or seen as coincidental brilliance. The reader begins to sense that Karina's orchestration is approaching a critical mass, where her subtle interventions may soon tip the balance of power entirely in her favor. By the end of this section, she has become the invisible hand guiding Briarwall, a figure whose influence is undeniable yet hidden, her calculated patience turning into a quiet, unstoppable force that will soon reshape the plantation completely. A sudden blaze erupts in the west storage building of Briarwall Plantation, destroying an entire year's harvest and critical supplies. On the surface, the fire is labeled an accident, attributed to an unattended lantern or a lightning strike from an unseasonable storm. But the circumstances surrounding it raise immediate suspicions: doors found unlocked that should have been secured, water buckets mysteriously emptied, and the timing coinciding perfectly with a critical meeting that would have challenged Karina's influence. Karina's role in the aftermath is ambiguous. She neither condemns nor condones, maintaining a calm and composed demeanor that only heightens the uncertainty surrounding her. In the chaotic days following the fire, the plantation descends into fear and confusion. Overseers accuse one another, staff whisper about omens, and the heir's already unstable temperament becomes erratic and desperate. Karina steps forward as a mediator, offering practical solutions for recovery, reorganizing supply chains, and advising on personnel adjustments. Her interventions appear selfless and stabilizing, yet every action subtly consolidates her control over both resources and perception. She is increasingly recognized as the only person capable of maintaining order amidst growing disorder. The narrative emphasizes psychological tension and the eerie atmosphere of Briarwall in the wake of the disaster. Charred timbers still smolder, the smell of smoke lingers in the corridors, and the night air carries an unsettling chill. Staff walk with wary steps, glancing at one another with suspicion, knowing that the true cause of the fire may never be discovered. Karina's calculated calm contrasts sharply with the panic around her, portraying her as a figure both enigmatic and authoritative. She begins to understand that real power at Briarwall comes not from inheritance or title but from the perception of indispensability and the ability to navigate catastrophe with precision. Subtle manipulations continue. She directs blame toward those who had opposed her in minor ways, ensuring that the heir's credibility erodes further while her own influence expands quietly yet decisively. Through her actions, she demonstrates an uncanny understanding of human psychology, leveraging fear, loyalty, and ambition to shape outcomes without overt confrontation. By the end of this section, the plantation is physically scarred and psychologically fractured, but Karina stands at the center, calm, composed, and poised, having transformed a tragedy into the ultimate demonstration of her strategic acumen, setting the stage for her uncontested rise to power. With the patriarch's health failing and the matriarch's attention increasingly consumed by frailty and domestic anxieties, the balance of power within Briarwall Plantation shifts dramatically. Karina, long accustomed to operating in the shadows, now becomes the indispensable force holding the estate together. Every decision she makes, every suggestion she offers, appears as a stabilizing presence to the household, yet each is a carefully calculated move designed to consolidate her influence. She quietly dictates who has access to whom, what information reaches the heir, and which staff members are entrusted with sensitive duties, all without overtly asserting authority. The heir's paranoia intensifies as he senses a change he cannot control. Karina subtly manipulates interactions to isolate him socially and politically within the plantation, fostering mistrust and dependence. Small incidents, a misdelivered message, a conveniently forgotten task, or a whispered warning, further destabilize him, ensuring that his reputation and credibility erode steadily. The staff increasingly turn to Karina as a source of guidance, seeing her as the only reliable figure in a household teetering on chaos. The narrative delves into the psychological tension permeating Briarwall. Corridors echo with uncertainty, whispered conversations fill the corners of dimly lit rooms, and subtle glances communicate allegiances and fears. Karina's calm demeanor contrasts sharply with the anxiety and suspicion that grip everyone else, emphasizing her growing control. She monitors the emotional climate carefully, intervening in crises only when it furthers her strategic goals. This section also examines the moral complexity of her rise. While she maintains the appearance of loyalty and compassion, each action is meticulously planned to strengthen her position. Her understanding of human behavior allows her to anticipate reactions and manipulate outcomes without confrontation. The plantation begins to reflect her influence, the schedule of daily routines, the flow of information, and even the atmosphere of the rooms mirror her subtle orchestration. By the end of this section, Briarwall Plantation has transformed from a chaotic, fragile estate into a structure where Karina's authority, though unspoken, is absolute. The heir is isolated, the matriarch incapacitated, and the staff dependent on her guidance. The house itself seems to acknowledge her control, with each hallway, chamber, and corridor bearing silent witness to the quiet architect who now directs every aspect of its existence. Suspense builds as it becomes clear that the stage is set for her ultimate ascension, and the reader senses that nothing within Briarwall will escape her influence again. The patriarch's death marks a turning point at Briarwall Plantation, but it is shrouded in ambiguity. Officially, he passes from natural causes, yet the timing is uncanny, occurring just as the matriarch's attention falters and the heir faces mounting instability. The will is read with quiet tension. Legally, the matriarch inherits the bulk of the estate, but her sudden emotional and physical decline renders her incapable of leadership. Karina, long prepared for such a moment, steps into the vacuum seamlessly, her presence now essential to the functioning of the household. Every decision, financial, operational, and social, passes through her guidance, though she claims no formal title. The heir, desperate to assert control, attempts a last-ditch maneuver to seize authority. Karina anticipates his every move, using subtle manipulations to expose his weaknesses while simultaneously presenting herself as a mediator and stabilizing force. Alliances within the household fracture under pressure. Trusted staff members are quietly steered toward loyalty to Karina, while others who oppose her find their influence systematically diminished. The psychological tension is palpable, whispered suspicions, uncertain glances, and veiled threats fill the air, creating a sense of claustrophobic dread that mirrors the story's slow-burning, macabre tone. The narrative emphasizes Karina's mastery of perception. She carefully manages appearances, allowing the heir's failures to be public while presenting herself as incorruptible and indispensable. Her interventions appear coincidental to those around her, yet each decision strategically eliminates obstacles to her authority. The plantation itself reflects the shift. Rooms once dominated by patriarchal or matriarchal presence now bear traces of her subtle influence, from the rearrangement of daily routines to the reassignment of staff. Even the architecture seems to serve her, corridors and staircases becoming pathways through which she controls movement, observation, and interaction. As the household stabilizes under her guidance, the broader community begins to take notice of her influence. Outsiders view the plantation as functioning smoothly despite internal crises, unaware of the quiet orchestration that ensures such appearances. Karina's rise is complete not through confrontation but through meticulous strategy, psychological acuity, and timing. By the end of this section, she has secured unchallenged control over Briarwall Plantation, the heir discredited and marginalized, and the matriarch incapacitated. The night closes with Karina standing alone in the great hall, a figure of calm authority in a house that has been reshaped entirely by her invisible hand, the reader left to ponder the true cost of power obtained through subtle, relentless manipulation. The patriarch's final hours cast a long, heavy shadow over Briarwall Plantation, an estate already steeped in tension, secrecy, and unspoken rivalries. His health had been failing for months, yet the suddenness of his final decline unsettled the household in ways that were both subtle and profound. Servants whispered about the precise timing of his passing, noting that key documents and letters had vanished the night before, and that unusual instructions had been quietly issued to certain overseers whose loyalties were already questionable. Every corner of the house seemed charged with an almost imperceptible tension, the flickering candlelight casting long, uneasy shadows across walls lined with portraits of ancestors whose stern faces seemed to judge the unfolding events. Karina Vale, ever watchful and prepared, positioned herself at the center of this growing turbulence, her movements measured and deliberate, her gaze quietly assessing every interaction, every whispered word, every glance of fear or ambition. She had long anticipated this moment, preparing herself to step seamlessly into the vacuum that would follow, yet doing so in a way that would appear accidental, almost inevitable, to everyone around her. The reading of the will was set for a brisk morning. The household gathered in the grand parlor where sunlight fell unevenly through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. The matriarch inherited the majority of the estate, but her frailty was palpable, and even those accustomed to her command could see that she was no longer capable of directing the household's complex operations. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the heavy parchment, and her voice wavered when acknowledging the details of the inheritance. The heir, standing with rigid posture and tightly pressed lips, immediately sensed the shift in power, though he did not yet comprehend the depth or inevitability of Karina's growing authority. Karina, who had for years been the quiet observer and manipulator behind the scenes, now became indispensable in practice. Every operational, financial, and personnel decision, once the domain of the patriarch or matriarch, was filtered through her counsel, yet she presented herself with such subtlety that her influence seemed almost incidental to those around her. The heir's response to this shift was predictable in its desperation yet revealing in its intensity. Accustomed to wielding inherited power with a sense of entitlement, he launched a series of subtle and not-so-subtle maneuvers designed to reassert control. Karina, however, anticipated each move, using foresight and psychological acuity to counteract his efforts. A misdirected letter here, a carefully placed suggestion to a loyal overseer there, a conversation intentionally overheard and interpreted to her advantage, all became tools in her invisible arsenal. The heir's credibility eroded steadily as each attempt to regain dominance backfired, often due to the precise orchestration of circumstances that Karina had quietly arranged. Staff members began aligning themselves with her, some consciously drawn to her calm authority, others subtly nudged by her interventions to see her as the only viable leader. The matriarch, too incapacitated to resist, became dependent on Karina's guidance, further cementing her position at the center of the estate's operations. The psychological climate within Briarwall during this time was fraught with tension. Every hallway, staircase, and chamber seemed to echo with whispers, not just of what had transpired but of what was anticipated to come. The staff moved through the house with a mixture of reverence, fear, and uncertainty, observing the subtle shifts in power and gauging their own positions within this new hierarchy. Karina's presence was simultaneously reassuring and intimidating. She mediated disputes with grace yet guided outcomes toward her desired objectives with an almost imperceptible hand. She cultivated the perception of calm competence while methodically eliminating opposition, isolating the heir socially and politically, and subtly undermining any potential threats to her ascension. In the days following the patriarch's passing, Karina implemented measures that solidified her control without drawing overt attention. She reviewed ledgers and accounts, identified vulnerabilities in resource distribution, and subtly advised the matriarch and staff on remedial actions. By appearing helpful and prudent, she ensured that her guidance was followed unquestioningly, further entrenching her authority. Decisions she made appeared logical and benevolent, yet each subtly reinforced her dominance, shaping both perception and reality in ways that only she fully understood. The house itself seemed to reflect this shift. Rooms that once echoed with the matriarch's commands or the patriarch's authority now became stages where Karina orchestrated the flow of information and movement, controlling who interacted with whom and what knowledge reached critical ears. The heir, increasingly isolated and frustrated, made a final, desperate attempt to regain control. He confronted key staff members, questioned their loyalties, and attempted to assert authority through threats and displays of anger. Karina anticipated these moves, quietly ensuring that each action undermined his credibility further. His public failures contrasted sharply with her calm, measured interventions, reinforcing the perception that she was the only figure capable of sustaining order and ensuring the estate's survival. Each failure deepened his discredit, while simultaneously elevating her reputation both within the house and in the broader social network of Briar County, where word of Briarwall's stability amidst internal turmoil quietly spread. By the end of this period, Briarwall Plantation had been irrevocably reshaped. Karina's ascent was complete, achieved without overt confrontation, coercion, or visible aggression. The heir was broken, marginalized, and largely irrelevant. The matriarch remained alive yet dependent, and the staff operated under a mixture of loyalty and fear, their actions guided by her subtle authority. The estate itself seemed to acknowledge her control, with every room, hallway, and corridor reflecting her influence. Even the natural rhythms of the plantation, work schedules, resource allocation, and social interactions, had been molded to her design. Karina stood in the grand hall one evening, observing the quiet efficiency of the household, fully aware of the intricate network of manipulations, alliances, and strategies that had brought her to this pinnacle. The narrative underscores the duality of her triumph. While she had achieved unmatched power and influence, it was accompanied by isolation, the erosion of genuine human connection, and the perpetual weight of maintaining control over a fragile ecosystem of loyalty and fear. The story closes on a chilling, reflective note, with Karina alone at the center of Briarwall, surveying her meticulously orchestrated domain, a figure both triumphant and haunted, leaving readers to contemplate the cost, complexity, and moral ambiguity of power gained through subtle, relentless manipulation. With Karina Vale firmly established as the uncontested authority of Briarwall Plantation, the estate settles into an unsettling calm. On the surface, the plantation operates with impeccable precision, fields are tended on schedule, accounts are meticulously maintained, and staff perform their duties with apparent diligence. Yet beneath this apparent order lies a subtle tension, a quiet undercurrent of fear, speculation, and grudging respect that permeates every corner of the estate. Locals begin to notice the remarkable efficiency of Briarwall, whispering about Karina's uncanny ability to maintain stability amid what had once been chaos, though few comprehend the full extent of her orchestration or the lengths she went to secure her power. Rumors begin to circulate, some portraying her as a savior who rescued Briarwall from collapse, others as a calculating force who orchestrated tragedies to clear her path to authority. Over time, her story becomes fertile ground for legend and folklore. The mysterious fire that destroyed the West Storage Building, the heir's public discrediting, and the matriarch's sudden incapacitation grow into exaggerated tales, whispered by servants, townspeople, and visitors alike. Some recount the events as if supernatural forces were at work, others attribute every shift in the household to Karina's clever manipulation, though no one dares speak openly of suspicions that could never be proven. Even children, hearing fragments of these stories, whisper her name with a mixture of awe and caution, sensing that she represents both the possibility of triumph and the shadow of danger. These tales blur the line between admiration and fear, cementing her place in Briar County's collective memory as a figure both revered and enigmatic. Inside Briarwall, the human consequences of Karina's rise become increasingly apparent. Relationships that might have been genuine are now shaped by power dynamics, loyalty, or fear. Staff members and minor family figures perform their duties diligently, yet their respect is mingled with unease. Bonds that might have provided companionship or emotional support are replaced by dependence on her guidance. Even as she ensures the plantation's material prosperity, the psychological and emotional costs of her authority are clear: isolation, subtle distrust, and the quiet tension of lives shaped by manipulation rather than mutual understanding. Karina herself experiences this in subtle ways. While she commands unquestioned authority, the solitude of her position, combined with the moral ambiguities of her decisions, creates a persistent undercurrent of reflection and unease, though she rarely allows it to surface outwardly. The narrative also examines the broader implications of her control over perception and reality. Outsiders marvel at Briarwall's smooth functioning, unaware of the delicate balance she maintains or the invisible mechanisms of manipulation that keep the estate running seamlessly. Scholars, visiting historians, and distant relatives attempt to piece together the truth, only to encounter missing records, inconsistent accounts, and the silent complicity of those who fear speaking openly. The ambiguity surrounding her actions ensures that her legend persists long after events have transpired, leaving future generations to debate whether she was a product of circumstance, a master strategist, or a figure whose ambition transcended conventional morality. The estate becomes both a monument to her intellect and a testament to the subtlety and effectiveness of unseen influence. In daily life, the rhythms of Briarwall bear Karina's unmistakable imprint. Work schedules, resource allocations, and social interactions all reflect her deliberate orchestration, even if her presence is not always directly visible. She monitors the household with precision, making adjustments quietly to maintain balance and control. Staff members move through the plantation with a mixture of obedience and apprehension, aware that their fates are subtly intertwined with her perceptions and decisions. Alliances, once fluid and unstable, now revolve around her authority, ensuring that loyalty is directed toward her rather than toward each other or any inherited hierarchy. Her influence is pervasive yet invisible, like a web spun so delicately that those caught within it may never fully recognize the strands that hold them in place. The estate's social network, both internally and in the wider community, reflects her dominance. Karina's decisions affect not just the immediate household but also relationships with neighboring plantations, local merchants, and civic authorities. Her reputation for competence and strategic foresight spreads quietly, enhancing her standing in ways that reinforce her internal control. Yet the moral ambiguity of her methods lingers as a shadow over her accomplishments. While Briarwall thrives materially and socially, every success is built upon manipulation, psychological insight, and careful orchestration of events that others perceive as chance, coincidence, or necessity. Her control is complete, but it is the product of relentless calculation rather than simple inheritance or brute force. As the years progress, Briarwall Plantation becomes a symbol of both Karina's brilliance and the hidden costs of ambition. The estate thrives in the material sense, fields yield abundant crops, finances remain stable, and the household operates with a disciplined efficiency unseen elsewhere. Yet the undercurrents of fear, secrecy, and subtle coercion persist, shaping the lives of those within its walls. Visitors may admire the plantation's outward elegance, but the air is thick with the weight of invisible forces, unseen hands guiding every interaction, decision, and movement. The legacy of Karina Vale is thus twofold. She is celebrated for her intelligence and strategic genius, yet quietly feared and morally enigmatic, a figure whose influence leaves lasting impressions on all who encounter her. By the conclusion of this period, Briarwall stands as both a triumph of meticulous strategy and a cautionary tale about the human cost of power. The staff operate efficiently but cautiously, the matriarch remains a dependent shadow of her former self, and the heir is marginalized and discredited, leaving Karina as the undisputed central figure. Her story endures in whispered conversations, half-told legends, and historical records marked by gaps and inconsistencies. The plantation, though outwardly prosperous, bears subtle reminders of the sacrifices, manipulations, and moral compromises required to achieve such unassailable authority. Karina Vale emerges as a complex, morally ambiguous figure whose dominance is complete, yet whose legacy leaves lingering questions about the intersection of ambition, ethics, and the true price of ascension. The narrative returns to the scene introduced at the beginning, with Karina Vale standing alone on the balcony of Briarwall Plantation, surveying the estate that she has meticulously shaped over years of quiet, calculated manipulation. The night air is heavy with humidity, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine and the distant smoke of a dying fire from the kitchens below. The moonlight casts long, wavering shadows across the veranda and the surrounding fields, illuminating the subtle undulations of the landscape she now commands. Each shadow seems to echo the many hidden maneuvers, whispered conversations, and carefully orchestrated events that led to her ascent. Karina's figure is calm, poised, yet an aura of quiet authority radiates from her, signaling a woman who has mastered not only her environment but the very people who inhabit it. She breathes in the night air with the composed detachment of someone who understands the full magnitude of her control. From her vantage point, she surveys Briarwall's grounds with an analytical eye. The main house, once a maze of fragile hierarchies, now functions like a living organism in which every staff member, every routine, and every task has been subtly aligned with her will. The gardens are meticulously maintained, the orchards organized with precise attention to yield, and the fields of crops stretch outward in geometric perfection. She recalls the countless decisions that led to this moment, who to trust, when to intervene, which alliances to cultivate, and which rivalries to allow to fester just long enough to be neutralized. Every incident, the fire, the heir's repeated failures, the matriarch's decline, was a step in her carefully plotted path. Even the casual choices of servants and overseers became components of a larger design, their actions guided subtly by her observation and insight. She has become the central force, the unseen architect of an empire that appears to function independently but is entirely dependent on her discretion and intelligence. Karina's reflection extends beyond practical accomplishments to the emotional and psychological dimensions of her power. The solitude that accompanies her authority is profound. Friendships, genuine connections, and personal loyalties have all been filtered through layers of necessity and strategic awareness. Those who once might have offered companionship now exist as instruments of the plantation's operations or as observers of her influence, their relationships with her mediated by fear, respect, and calculated dependency. Even her own thoughts carry the weight of continuous vigilance. She must remain aware of subtle shifts in mood, whispers among the staff, and changes in the demeanor of distant relatives and neighbors. The burden of this constant observation is heavy, yet she bears it with a composure that further cements her authority. The estate itself seems to respond to her presence. Hallways, staircases, and rooms are imbued with the history of her interventions, the echoes of long-past decisions, and the subtle redirection of power flows she has engineered. Every glance from a servant, every quietly closed door, every hushed conversation is part of a system she designed. The narrative emphasizes the gothic elements of her environment: moonlight glinting off polished wood, the creak of floorboards under silent footsteps, the long shadows of trees swaying in the wind, and the distant howl of a hound. These sensory details create an atmosphere of both triumph and unease, reflecting the duality of her accomplishments and the subtle cost they carry. The plantation, though outwardly serene, is alive with the legacy of her manipulation and vigilance. Karina's mind drifts to the broader consequences of her actions. The heir has been permanently diminished in influence, the matriarch reduced to a figure of dependency, and staff members operate in a network structured entirely by her strategic design. The local community observes Briarwall as a model of efficiency, unaware of the meticulous orchestration underlying its apparent stability. Outsiders admire the estate's order, never questioning how one woman has quietly reshaped the dynamics of power, loyalty, and fear over the years. Even the folklore that begins to circulate hints at her almost supernatural ability to anticipate, manipulate, and control, blurring the lines between human cunning and uncanny foresight. Tales of the fire, of sudden illnesses, and of perfectly timed interventions circulate in whispers, but no one can prove or disprove the stories, leaving her legend both awe-inspiring and chilling. Despite her absolute authority, Karina is acutely aware of the moral complexities surrounding her rise. Each success carries hidden costs, relationships strained or broken, ambitions crushed, and lives subtly redirected to serve her purposes. She understands that the brilliance of her control is inseparable from the shadow it casts over those around her. The quiet efficiency of Briarwall is maintained not only through strategy but also through a constant, vigilant management of perception, emotion, and loyalty. She has become a master of human psychology, bending not only events but also belief and expectation to align with her objectives. As the night deepens, Karina reflects on her journey. She remembers the early years, when her intelligence was underestimated, when she observed others' mistakes and learned their patterns, and when small, careful interventions began to shape the course of the estate's destiny. Each calculated risk, each whispered suggestion, each act of patient manipulation contributed to her ultimate position. Yet the cost of this mastery is evident in her isolation. While she commands devotion, obedience, and fear, she experiences few moments of genuine companionship or personal solace. The narrative emphasizes the tension between triumph and solitude, illustrating the complex emotional landscape of someone who has attained unmatched power through subtlety, patience, and psychological acumen. The final moments on the balcony capture the duality of Karina's existence. She stands as both conqueror and sentinel, surveying the fields and halls that function at her discretion, yet carrying the awareness of the intricate web of control that must be continually maintained. The moonlight highlights the lines of her face, the calmness of her posture, and the intensity of her gaze, suggesting a woman who has achieved everything yet remains forever vigilant. The story closes with a sense of lingering unease and reflection, inviting readers to contemplate the full implications of ambition, intelligence, and moral ambiguity. Karina Vale's legacy is complete. She is both a master of Briarwall and a solitary figure, her influence unchallenged, her power absolute, and the cost of her rise etched into every shadowed corridor, whispered rumor, and silent gaze across the estate. Years have passed since Karina Vale solidified her rule over Briarwall Plantation, yet the estate remains a place where the past and present intertwine, creating a tense, almost spectral atmosphere. The house, grand and meticulously maintained, bears the imprint of her hand in every detail, from the precise layout of the gardens to the arrangement of furniture in the great hall. Each room carries silent witness to the years of subtle manipulation, whispered strategies, and carefully orchestrated events that led to her uncontested authority. The air inside the house seems charged, heavy with unspoken histories, forgotten grievances, and the invisible threads of loyalty and fear that tie the staff and remaining family members to her will. Karina moves through this living maze with effortless control, every glance and gesture measured, every word carefully placed, as though the house itself bends to her influence. The psychological landscape of Briarwall has shifted in profound ways. Staff members who once held individual opinions and loyalties now function almost as extensions of Karina's consciousness, acting with a mixture of obedience, apprehension, and respect. Conversations are measured, and even minor disagreements are quietly redirected to serve her purposes. Yet beneath this disciplined surface lies a subtle tension, whispered stories of past incidents, unexplained disappearances, and curious accidents circulate in soft tones among those who have spent their lives under her gaze. While she ensures stability and productivity, the plantation is haunted by the knowledge that every move, every decision, and every interaction is observed and subtly guided. Fear, respect, and dependency coexist in a delicate balance, creating an invisible hierarchy that maintains her dominance without requiring overt displays of authority. Karina's own reflection on these years is complex. She acknowledges the brilliance of her orchestration but is acutely aware of the isolation it has imposed. Genuine companionship has been replaced by strategic alliances, and trust is always conditional, contingent on loyalty and perception. She has mastered the psychology of those around her, yet this mastery comes at the cost of human connection. Each staff member, each family member, each ally is a player in an intricate game that she continues to manipulate with precision. The narrative emphasizes the duality of her position: absolute control coexists with profound solitude, and her triumph is inseparable from the web of psychological influence she must constantly maintain. The plantation itself becomes a character in this section, reflecting both her power and the shadows it casts. The hallways echo with memories of past confrontations, whispered secrets, and subtle manipulations. Staircases, once neutral structures, are now passages she uses to gauge movement, loyalty, and tension. Even the fields and gardens bear her signature, their meticulous order mirrors the precision with which she governs human behavior. Every element of the estate, from the smallest tool to the grandest architectural feature, has been subtly influenced to reinforce her authority and maintain her vision of control. The legacy of past conflicts continues to reverberate through the house. The heir, now distant and largely irrelevant, occasionally visits, a reminder of past failures and near disruptions to her plans. The matriarch, dependent and frail, lingers in the periphery, a living testament to the subtle methods Karina employed to consolidate power. Staff members navigate a complex landscape of loyalty, fear, and subtle coercion, aware that the slightest misstep could have consequences, yet also benefiting from the stability and order Karina has established. The narrative highlights the tension between dependency and autonomy, illustrating how the plantation functions both as a monument to her genius and as a cage for those under her influence. The surrounding community continues to regard Briarwall with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Stories of past incidents, fires, illnesses, and sudden shifts in authority, have evolved into legends, further reinforcing Karina's enigmatic reputation. Outsiders rarely see the inner workings of the estate, and when they do, the seamless operation conceals the intricate orchestration that underpins every detail. Her influence extends beyond the walls of Briarwall itself, subtly shaping the perceptions and behaviors of those who interact with her, creating a network of control that reaches into the wider community. The narrative also examines the interplay of morality, ambition, and consequence. Karina's rise was achieved through intelligence, patience, and an acute understanding of human psychology, yet each success carried hidden costs. Relationships were strained or broken, lives were redirected or altered, and a delicate balance of fear and respect was cultivated to sustain her authority. The story emphasizes that her mastery is not the result of brute force but of relentless strategic calculation, subtle manipulation, and the continuous observation of human behavior. This duality, triumph paired with moral ambiguity, is central to the enduring tension that permeates Briarwall. Throughout this period, Karina remains vigilant, aware that the stability she has constructed is delicate and must be actively maintained. Minor disruptions, a disagreement between staff, a miscommunication, or an unexpected visitor, are addressed swiftly and strategically, often in ways that appear coincidental or happenstance to outsiders. Her ability to foresee outcomes and subtly shape events reinforces her control, and the plantation functions as both her domain and a reflection of her mind, orderly, precise, and calculated, yet layered with shadows and hidden complexities. The story culminates with Karina standing once more on the balcony, the same vantage point from which she has observed the estate through countless seasons. The night is quiet, almost oppressive, and the moonlight casts a silver glow over the meticulously tended grounds. She reflects on the years of careful orchestration, the subtle maneuvers, the whispered manipulations, and the psychological mastery that have secured her position. Briarwall stands as a testament to her intelligence, strategic brilliance, and relentless patience, yet it also embodies the cost of power, isolation, moral ambiguity, and the ever-present weight of responsibility for every life and action under her influence. In this section, the tension between triumph and consequence is fully realized. Karina is both victorious and haunted, her empire of subtle control complete yet demanding constant vigilance. Briarwall Plantation is no longer merely a home or a workplace, it is a living, breathing testament to her genius and her relentless pursuit of authority. The shadows that stretch through the halls and gardens reflect the human and ethical costs of her ascent, leaving readers with a lingering sense of awe, unease, and contemplation about the true nature of power, ambition, and the subtle, enduring influence of one woman who shaped an entire world in her image.